Yep.
All right, it says it's setting up the meeting for Facebook Live. So it seems to be going as the redirection that I've seen in the past.
It's always a triumph when things actually do.
Oh, MWA NorCal chapter is live now. So it seems to have done something.
There we are.
Yay.
Oops, I turned it off.
Okay. So I will go ahead. Oh, look, here comes a few more people. Let me just do the admittance and then we'll move on. Lexa is here.
Did we start the Zoom recording?
I will do that as soon as I'm done babbling about bringing in the last minute folks from the, oh, Lori's helping out. Thank you, Lori.
I got them. Yeah,
you got them all? Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start the recording and give you a little bit of information. We are now recording and we are live on Facebook. So for those of you out in the audience, if you would like the best viewing experience, and you haven't heard this yet, if you scroll up, open your chat, which is down at the bottom of the screen, it should pop up on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you scroll up to the top, the first chats that are there, Lori King has posted some instructions for turning off any non-video participants. The really quick version of that is, again, move your mouse around on your Zoom screen. On the bottom left, you'll see something that looks like a camera for your video. There's an up caret next to that. If you click the up caret, you'll see video settings. Click video settings, it opens a secondary window, and then there's a toggle somewhere on that screen, on the video options screen, that says hide all non-video participants. Once you do that, you can go back to the speaker view and click actually gallery view to make sure that gallery view is turned on. And once everyone's cameras are turned off, except the moderator and the panelists, you will only see the 5 videos of the moderator and the panelists, and that will give you the best viewing option for this evening. So with that out of the way, anybody that has any questions for me or for the panelists, if you put them in the chat in all capitals, I will keep track of those and I'll make sure that those are answered or provided to the panelists at the end of the presentation. And with no further ado, welcome to night 5 of Mystery Week, an annual celebration of crime writing from the NorCal chapter of Mystery Writers of America. We have been Mystery Writers of America has been empowering mystery writers and encouraging mystery readers since 1945. I am Lori Sheehan, NorCal board member and events coordinator. I encourage all of you to join us both in our many events that are available to the public, and also think about becoming a member. It's a lot of fun. Take a look at our website, which is mwanorcal.org, where you'll find a list of upcoming events and member benefits, and watch our Facebook page for the series of live talks and panels that we're putting on. Tonight's panel is on Dangerous Ideas, Does Genre Fiction Matter? And our moderator is Randall Brandt. Randall is a board member of MWA NorCal as well, and is the head of cataloging at the Bancroft Library and curator of the Bancroft's collection of California detective fiction. And I will now turn tonight's event over to you, Randy.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you everyone for showing up. I've also not had a haircut since February. Here we are.
Me either.
Me either.
I'm not quite able to put my hair up like Lori's, but it's getting close. Okay, so I'm going to start off tonight by introducing our panel and then letting them tell you a little bit about themselves and their books and their characters. And then we've got a series of questions that I will be asking each of them, and I'm hoping that these questions will generate a conversation that that we can have on these topics. And when we get to the end, we're going to open it up to the audience for questions, and hopefully you'll have some questions for us. And then after that, if anyone wants to stick around afterwards, we'll have the virtual cocktail hour, and you can turn on your cameras and interact and do everything you would at an author event except get your book signed. So anyway, I'm going to start by introducing our panel. So the first person that I'm going to introduce is Faye Snowden. Wave your hand, Faye. There we go. Faye is the author of 4 mysteries, including Spiral of Guilt, The Savior, and Fatal Justice. Her newest book, A Killing Fire, was released in August 2019, and she's working on the sequel. She's published short stories and poems in various literary journals and small presses. And her story, One Bullet, One Vote, was published this summer in Low Down Dirty Vote, Volume 2, an anthology that came out just a few weeks ago. Faye also serves as the secretary to the National Sisters in Crime. So, Faye, could you just briefly tell us who is Raven Burns?
Raven Burns is a pretty screwed up homicide detective because her dad is a serial killer. And she was with him on some of his kills when she was just a toddler, pretty much, and a very young individual, a young kid. But she has spent her entire life trying to make up for what he did. So in this second book is called A Killing Rain. In each book, she makes a decision that's going to lead her either closer to who her father was, or it's going to lead her down the path of a productive, law-abiding citizen. And nobody knows which one. So, and I'm anxious to find out.
You don't know either.
I don't know either.
The other thing that I wanted to say is that Faye is joining us from the town of Modesto, California.
Yes.
I'm gonna let everybody know where everybody is, because one of the interesting things about these Zoom calls, as opposed to the old way we used to do it, where we're all sitting in the room together, nobody out there knows where anybody is. So I'm coming to you from Berkeley. Faye's in Modesto. So the next panelist is Lori R. King, coming to you live from Santa Cruz. Lori is the New York Times bestselling author of 27 novels and other works, including the Mary Russell Sherlock Holmes stories, the Kate Martinelli series, and several standalones. She's probably the only writer to have both an Edgar and an honorary doctorate in theology. She's currently the president of the Northern California chapter of Mystery Writers of America, and lives, as she says, a genteel life of crime on California's Central Coast. Her most recent book is called Riviera Gold and was published in June. So Lori, tell us a little bit about Mary Russell and the adventures that she gets up to in Riviera Gold.
Yeah. I always sort of speaking to a mixed audience is always interesting, because you start out by saying, well, there's this young girl who met Sherlock Holmes and then became his partner and married him. And you think, many people are thinking, this sounds really creepy. But somehow it kind of works. But this is, they've now known each other for 10 years. And they go off to, the last book was in Venice, and they are now in the south of France and in Monaco, where they meet the circle of artists and writers that began to summer there in the mid 1920s, that came together over the Murphys, Sarah and Gerald Murphy. So you have Zelda and Scott Fitzgerald and various other odds and ends you come wandering through. Russell has a conversation with Pablo Picasso, and ends up in Monaco with looking into a murder that that Mrs. Hudson seems to be involved with. So that's the basic story of Riviera Gold.
Okay, thanks. Our third panelist is Owen Hill, coming to us from Oakland. So Owen is a crime fiction writer and a poet. He's the author of 2 crime novels featuring book scout, poet, and part-time detective Clay Blackburn. The 2 novels were The Chandler Apartments and The Incredible Double. He's also the co-annotator and editor of the new edition of Raymond Chandler's classic novel, The Big Sleep, and the co-editor of Berkeley Noir, published earlier this year by Akashic Press. He has reviewed crime novels for the Los Angeles Times and the East Bay Express, and he's a buyer and events coordinator at Moe's Books in Berkeley, California. So, Owen, what is Clay Blackburn up to these days?
He's moving into kind of a different area with the third novel that eventually I will finish. There's sort of a preview of that, a short story in Berkeley Noir. He and his Book Scout cohorts are sort of going into the urban guerrilla Robin Hood area and becoming pseudo criminals themselves, while of course solving murder mysteries because we're mystery writers. But it's fun because I write these as satire, and hopefully it's a crazy group of urban guerrillas and not too threatening. But I get to get my political jolts in there too, hopefully.
Okay, great. Okay, and Ray James, who's joining us tonight from Roseville, California, which is near Sacramento, for those of you who are not familiar with that part of the state. Ray James, who writes as R. Franklin James, is a graduate of the University of California, Berkeley. Go Bears.
Okay.
And after a career of political and legislative advocacy and serving as the deputy mayor of the city of Los Angeles, she went back to her first love, writing mysteries. Her debut novel, The Fallen Angels Book Club, which was the first book in the Hollis Morgan mystery series, came out in 2013. And a new series, the Remy Lowe Bishop Mysteries, started last year in 2019 with the novel The Appraiser. She serves on the board of the Sacramento chapter of Sisters in Crime and is a member of the Northern California Publishers and Authors. So Ray, introduce us to Remy Bishop.
Remy Bishop is a, she wanted to be, let me start out with this. She's like a poster child for second chances. And more than anything, she had a vision of herself as leading a life of not necessarily a legal life, but where she would be with a class of people that would introduce her to the art world where she wanted to belong. And she becomes an appraiser, she takes the exam, and she finds that sometimes when you go and into these homes of the rich and the famous, you find more than just baubles and vases, you find bodies. And she discovers that other than being a suspect herself, that you can gain more from reimagining yourself. I'm trying, it's hard with a mystery without trying to give away the clues, but she's reimagining herself as someone who falls into the role of helping others versus just helping herself. I think that's her biggest discovery in book one, is that it's not all about me.
Okay, so yes, like I said, I've prepared a series of questions that I'll start by just sort of directing each question to one of you to enter first, and then, but I hope that that as you think about what each other are saying, that you feel free to jump in and we'll just have a conversation. So I'm going to start with Faye. This first question, I'm going to let you answer first. So at a recent panel discussion that I saw, which was about contemporary crime writing, Ian Rankin said, "Crime novels show us the essential truth of human nature." And the author Neil Gaiman has also written something similar where he said, "Fiction is the lie that tells the truth." Mm-hmm. So the question is, first of all, do you agree with these statements that crime fiction can somehow tell us truth? And if so, what are the hallmarks of crime fiction that reveal the truth to a reader?
Oh my goodness. So yeah, it's really funny. I had to do another talk for university where I used that the Neil Gaiman quote about fiction is a lie that tells the truth. I don't think he said it first though, because I looked that up and it didn't seem like, I think somebody else said it first. I think some Oscar Wilde. There's other people who've been credited with something similar, but anyway. Yeah, and I do really believe that. I think that it's a genre fiction to me, and I'm an English major as far, you know, I'm an IT geek and an English major, but I've always thought that genre fiction was just fundamentally important to society, especially detective and crime fiction, because it's kind of, to me, it's almost like a neuroticism, because you know, you'll hear critical theory talk about crime fiction started in an age where the United States was in a lot of turmoil. So it was a way for those who necessarily did not want the change to kind of to live in that to create an imaginary world where they felt safe in. So it kind of, I don't think it may not show who we are, but I think it kind of shows who we want to be. Where it gets dangerous, or kind of where it gets revealing, when you start getting a whole bunch of other voices and perspectives, and some of those who start subverting some of the you know, the rules of the genre. And then I think when you get a whole bunch of voices and you have this conversation going, then it starts to reveal. So I think it's a wish and then a revelation, if I may. So that's what I think. So.
Well, what's it? Ray, you got something to add to that?
I was just thinking that because the question came up in me, I thought, you know, this is probably really deeper than I think. The fiction actually packages, I think, and disguises society's fears. No matter, like, you have different subgenres and mysteries. You know, you have the cozy, and you have traditional, you have crime, as you say, and you have historicals. But basically, at the time that piece is written, I think it's a timeless platform for what society is dealing with. I think the best, the worst of society, and I think what genre allows you to do is to package it so that not only is it entertaining, it is engaging, and sometimes even educational. You learn about what's going on in society at that point in time that that particular genre is being generated, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had one of my characters in the short story I write, Low Down Dirty Vote, and it's like you do it through sneak, right? You don't confront someone with the truth. You draw them in with the entertainment and just, you know, some of the rules that they expect, what they expect, and then you start talking about these heavy issues where you may not get as much impact if you wrote an essay or something like that.
One of the things that crime fiction does is we build our mystery. We build the entire plot. We build the suspects and the clues and the investigation on detail. And because our stories are so close on detail, it allows us to pull in a lot of things that might not necessarily fit in a more mainstream novel. I mean, to my mind, mystery can be about almost anything, so long as you are telling the story and entertaining. I mean, that's sort of our basic requirement, isn't it? But you can be all kinds of, you can play with all kinds of ideas and subvert. I mean, Faye used the word subvert, and I think subversion is one of the things that I love about crime fiction, is that we sneak stuff in.
Yeah, I think that's the art of digression is like what hooks me in detective series. Sure, it's a great story. I love the character, but then their opinions come out, or they see something, and it's just enough off the plot to keep you interested and wanting to get back in the plot at the same time. So that and those digressions are where you can talk about deeper things too.
Mm-hmm.
Do you, as a fiction writer, as a crime fiction writer, do you feel obligated to write true things even if you have to tell lies in order to do it?
Well, you want a little bit of the truth to be maybe behind it. I mean, and you know, it's fiction, so in some ways it is a lie, if you want to call it that. But yeah, it's a way to tell the truth that's entertaining and doesn't lecture.
I think, I don't know, this is maybe a controversial statement, but I think obligation and storytelling are those two ideas together. I think when you sit down to write, to thinking that you have an obligation other than just to tell the story, I think that, to me, that's no. I mean, you have an obligation to tell a really good, riveting story, but I don't feel an obligation to tell the truth. I think that would come out through my storytelling, right? It's not something that I think consciously about. Yeah, that's an interesting question.
I think that it's fascinating how ideas and themes come out when you're not expecting them.
Mhm.
Not Riviera Gold, but the one before was set in Venice. And I had intended to write a light entertainment. I wanted something that was warm and sunny and had cold porter and the people in bars and dancing and all the rest of it. So I took him to Venice, and I'm writing it in what, 2017, 2018. And I get to Venice in 1925 and I think, oh yeah, Mussolini. Okay, well, there we go. And I find it fascinating how often that comes out when I'm writing a story and I'm not aware of any issues in it. Because I don't usually like strongly political books. I hate books that smell of the soapbox, that sort of grab you by the collar and say, this is what you have to believe. I mean, that I never get past the first or second chapter on that kind of book. But it's fascinating how, as you are writing, certain realities of the outer world come winding their way in. I mean, I'm sure the rest of you find that too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I think, don't you think that storytelling in itself, other than just having to have a really active imagination, at its core, and I remember hating this word in English class, the theme of it, but at its core, it is expressing, I think, a societal value or mores. I mean, it really is, you're making something up, but you're making it up in order for it to be relevant. It has to have a touch of reality to it. It has to be relatable. People have to say, yeah, that's how it is for me too. Or that's what I would do too. Or I would never do that. I never would have thought of that. So it's like we always have to, even though we're making it up, we're still tying it back to a very real place where we come from in our society. I think not society sounds like a very big word, and I'm looking for a smaller one, which is more like where we are today, just today, what we're facing today. And I agree with you, Lori, sometimes that you know, the political realm goes off on a tangent, or can, but you can still, there's still that nut of it that says that's the truth, or that's the lie, that's the life-threatening situation, or that's the courage. It always comes back to those basic, I think, tenets of society that we write about just blindly. We don't even realize, we just tell our stories automatically. And that
You can't help it.
Yeah, you can't help it. Exactly.
Because you're really not creating out of whole cloth. I mean, you're creating from in the times that you are, right? Things that are around you, and yeah. And I think too that if you do it with an obligation, I'm going to sit down and tell the truth, like readers can smell that a mile away, and they will close your book, except if you're John Grisham. Right? they may try to read it all the way through.
It's your truth. It's your truth.
Exactly. Yeah.
anyone else's, but it's yours,
Mhm.
and you hope that maybe out there, there is somebody else who shares that truth and it becomes a reader. But, that's why we have, marketing.
You sound so enthusiastic about marketing, right?
Yeah.
So Ray mentioned a little while ago, she mentioned about fears. And I was really happy when she said that, because that segues very nicely into my next little bit of questioning here. So it's Halloween season. So I thought we could spend a little bit of time talking about fear. And what better vehicle to talk about fear than noir? So I'm going to start with Owen. He edited a book called Berkeley Noir. So I thought that, who better to start talking about noir than Owen. So in noir, characters are often either drawn into unlawful conduct or they struggle to stay honest in a crooked world. A common predicament in noir is the seeking of justice outside the law. So insight or pleasure might readers gain from immersing themselves in such a fraught fictional environment? Can they identify with characters who seem to lack any control over their lives?
I think so, obviously, because it's a pretty popular way to work. And in a way, I don't get why, because it can be awfully depressing. I mean, noir at its kind of at its best, like Goodis or someone, is not what you call uplifting, but somehow within that, you get a real window into the human experience. And I think perhaps people they feel for the guy who has been drawn into this horrible situation. We've all been drawn into bad situations. I don't know, luckily most of us haven't murdered anyone, but there is this appeal to light and darkness, and as in the film, the shadows and the shadows that appear in the best noir fiction is, there's just something about it. And I don't know, noir has become kind of a wide thing too. I know doing Berkeley Noir, mostly it has a lot to do with mood, and rather than the old-fashioned double indemnity kind of situation, it has to do with the darkness and the light, to try to put it in a poetic way.
So Laurie, why do people like to read about people who are out of control or in fraught situations?
I can't really talk about noir because I don't live there. But I think that one of the appeals of crime fiction in general is that it gives us a sort of paradigm for thinking about the kinds of fears that we have in the backs of our minds. So that if this character I'm writing about gets locked in a box underground, to think about how she would deal with that, what it would do to her. It allows us to focus on the terror and the determination and the cleverness of getting out. The kinds of stories that have to do with, the versions of the threat that comes from within the house, not just the one where you answer the phone and the person who's calling you is in the house, but the kinds of ones where someone very close to you is the threat. That it enables you to really focus on that and think about it and live somewhat vicariously, but also standing back and saying, what would I do and how would I triumph here? Because I think crime fiction tends to be about the triumph, not so much noir, but the other side of the spectrum tends to be the focus on the solution, even if the problems are very, very real.
And I guess that's kind of the opposite of noir, where there is no solution, and it's a much darker situation. The characters don't usually end up well, and yet there is an appeal to that.
Do you think that maybe we write mysteries because you're allowed to go to that dark place and either show up as a hero or show your worst side, and it's acceptable. It's considered entertaining. You know, I think when you think of a quote unquote villain, and I'm sort of like Lori, and I would read noir like early in the day, not right before I went to bed, you know, but
Pick me up.
yeah, it allows you to, but it does allow you to sort of reveal those parts of yourself that otherwise may not be acceptable. You know, you can go there and come out, you know, and it'd be okay, and you can come through it. And mysteries allow you more than anything. I'm trying to think of any other genre to do that, you know, to the dark side.
Mhm.
Ada, do you have something you want to add?
No, I agree. It does, because it's almost like with the mystery, all the, you know, the hard work is kind of done. And I'm not saying that writing a mystery is not hard, it is hard, but at least you've got like some scaffolding and a framework, you know, the rules of the genre that you can either follow if you want or not follow, but it's there. And then so you kind of put flesh on those bones and kind of go to that dark place and kind of explore some of the things that you think about more deeply with the written word. All my books started with an idea. With this one, it was because my dad and my mom and, you know, butted heads, and I thought my dad was the devil, and I'm thinking, oh, he's the devil. Well, he's not. But if he's the devil, but don't tell my mom. If he's the devil, you know, what does that make me? And then so I started thinking about, well, what if my dad was really the devil? What if he was the serial killer? And that's how The Raven Burns came up. Now, for my other book, because there's a lot of, you know, drug use in my family. And so I used to think, you know, when I was little, and I was thinking even as I got to be an adult, you know, what if I just gave this addict the drugs that they wanted and they didn't have to go out and do bad things to them? So what kind of person would do that? And that's how I explored that kind of very dark kind of situation. So I think that that you're allowed to, I think more than what we're calling literary fiction or upmarket or whatever you want to call it. I think that with mystery, there's a little bit more freedom because some of the work is done for you without having that you can go deeper, I believe, if you wanted to. Now, you don't have to, but if you wanted to, you could. So.
So, and I am just, for these questions, I am using noir sort of just as a framework to ask you questions about other things that are maybe fearful. So even if you don't write noir, I think we're getting a really good conversation. So this is great. So, so the next thing that I was going to bring up is, so again, going back to noir though, but one of the tenets of noir is greed gets punished by the universe. A character's moral weakness leads to their doom. But in real life, and especially it seems in today's society, the opposite seems to be true often. Greed is often celebrated, and it usually wins, which is really frightening when you stop to think about it. So, so the question, and I'm going to throw out the question, and whoever thinks they have an answer, go get us started. So, what role do you think does crime fiction play, especially noir, in revealing or facing the fears of the contemporary audience? And, you know, we can talk about contemporary books, your own books, we can talk about books from the past. Anybody? Owen.
I lost a little bit of you there. You were asking
Oh, sorry.
how much crime fiction reveals the fears of the audience?
Yes. Okay, this is not a good question.
No,
I think it's good. I'm just kind of thinking about.
I'm thinking about it.
Well, if you
Yeah.
look at, for example, the golden age fiction,
Mhm.
th- that was produced in the, you know, the 20s and 30s and a little into the 40s. You have this almost Victorian remnant of a real fear of people who are from another social class, and the dangers that happen when people step outside their classes. That's mostly the British Golden Age fiction. Some here, but and that really is fascinating. I've been since lockdown and pandemic, I haven't been able to read a lot of new stuff. I've been buying it and sitting on my shelf and waiting, but I've been rereading a lot of old stuff. And it's fascinating how the Golden Age stuff doesn't always hold up well, because I keep tripping over these assumptions that class is good, and therefore, you know, Lord Peter Wimsey's way of dealing with things, or Dorothy Allingham's characters. You know, and I find that I have a lot of problems that I didn't when I first read them. When I first read them, I loved them, and I thought they were these delicious social commentaries and intellectual gains and revelation into the minds of these people. And it's true, they are a revelation. And you get these funny little dark corners that you don't expect that have been interesting.
Thinking about what you said about greed as a motivator, and it's hard to come up with a mystery that didn't somehow have greed as a motivator, and people either getting caught up in that or getting murdered for it. And I think that's an interesting concept, that the whole idea of the MacGuffin and what people will do for that. I have one of these years I want to write a con man book having to do with people being brought in to the greed, because we were living in the time of one of the greatest cons in our country. So it just seems like the perfect time to do that.
So that's interesting, and then that just kind of brings me to another question of all this fiction, and talk about what they reveal about a society and how important it. I mean, what if that somebody was king for the day and said, no more genre fiction, no more detective fiction, pack it all in, we're not publishing anymore, and we're going to disappear what's already out there. I mean, what do you guys think? What kind of impact do you think that would have on society if there was just no more?
Well, I'd have to live in my car.
Besides that part, I mean, do you think
May
it's
not affect
good?
too much, but I got a small car.
That's an excellent question, Faye.
That is an excellent question. Thank you.
No.
The thought
I've
that
always
came-
wondered.
Yeah, the thought that came to me was, I don't see how you could, we wouldn't have it. We would just be calling it something else, because I don't see how you could possibly talk about, if it's fiction at all, even at its basis level, there's some mystery to life. Just fiction, nonfiction, humor, whatever. There's something that's an unknown, that question mark, that algebra problem that I was never able to solve, where I never knew the X factor. You know, that's the mystery, you know, and we may not call it that. We may say, well, we're not having any more mysteries in our society anymore, but you can't get around it. It's just life. You know, you're solving puzzles. You're trying to you're questioning what's behind that locked door. You know, there's just, to me, it's just so inherent to living. I think that's why mysteries are so popular today, is that it's very relevant. And so you can't say there'll be no more mysteries, because then there wouldn't be any more life.
And genre fiction now, I mean, it bleeds all over literary fiction too.
Yeah.
I mean, what's Paul Auster and Jonathan Lethem and people like that? What are they? And on the other side is Attica Locke, a literary writer, or is she a mystery writer? Maybe in a funny way, it is all disappearing into one form of fiction where you can use anything you like.
Lee Child has a lovely essay in a book that I co-edited about writing, where he says that the thriller is the original story, that everything else, all the literary fiction, is just barnacles on the ship. That the real story, the one that we told each other in the caves, the thriller, because that is essentially what a story is. It puts us in a made-up situation and shows us that we're going to get out.
So you like the Odyssey and maybe Beowulf, and would you consider those thrillers?
Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth.
Yeah.
The Odyssey is totally a thriller.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I never
Odyssey-
thought of it that way until you said that.
Yeah.
At first I was like, I don't know if I would agree with that. But then I'm like, oh yeah, no, yeah, I could see that you would, the Odyssey's a thriller. Yeah.
Even the Canterbury Tales. You could kind of see that as a
You think the
thriller.
Canterbury Tales?
Well,
Yeah.
they're more, not all of them.
Yeah. Not the ones about farting, right?
Romeo and Juliet is pure noir. I mean, you have a murder-suicide. You can't get more noir than that. That's not a happy ending.
No.
And Hamlet and Ophelia, the puddle, and yeah, interesting.
But it's also interesting to look at how internationally, over the last 150 years, people have used mystery stories as a tool for social commentary.
Yeah.
I mean, the Martin Beck series by Sherval and Valu, they deliberately set out to write 10 books that functioned as a criticism of society. And they took 10 different aspects of it and wrote their fairly dark police procedurals around aspects that they thought needed to be addressed in modern society. And it's the kind of thing that you find a lot of times, even oppressive regimes will allow mysteries and crime fiction to be sold and to circulate because they don't realize what's in them.
Yes. Right. Yeah.
Which brings us back to subversive quality of crime fiction.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Completely agree. Yeah.
So, Laura, you were mentioning the Golden Age, which segues nicely into my next series of questions, which starts off with a discussion of Golden Age detective fiction, which, as you mentioned, began in the early 20th century. And as you also noted, a lot of those novels, those novels from the Golden Age, they contain racism, both casual and overt. They contain classism, anti-Semitism. And so in many ways, in many cases, the novels, they reveal the cultural biases of the authors themselves and of the times in which they lived and the books were written. So as a writer of historical fiction, how do you portray that time period? And do you, I know I have the word obligated here again, and I know we just talked, so I'm trying to rephrase it. You don't feel obligated, but how do you reflect those times for a modern reader without reverting to the norms of the time, I guess?
It is difficult, isn't it? Because I'm writing characters in 1925. They have certain attitudes and expectations. Interestingly, an awful lot of British society, you can find these odd people who pop up that don't fit the norms. People like Gertrude Bell, who's raised as an upper middle class, lower upper class young woman who happens to take a trip to the Near East and falls in love with the desert, and then off she goes, and she lives among the Bedouin. She has, a camel train with dinner service on it, and she shapes the Middle East as it is now. You had the other Mary Russell, who set off to finish her father's book on the fishes of West Africa, and ended up writing a book called The Blessings of a Good Thick Skirt, based on the fact that as she was walking through the jungle with her bearers, she fell through a wild animal trap and would have been impaled but for her bustle. So you have these odd people. So I tend to play on those people who move in areas of society that aren't necessarily expected, who, being American and being 21st century, we tend to forget that Britain has been a multi-ethnic society for 1,000 years, longer. That this idea that we have of, London as being people who look like me, is not true. And so I think that being aware of it, you can work on it. Being aware of whether it's sexism, and there's a lot of sexism in the books too, especially those written by women. You think, really? Dorothy, you're saying that? That it, you don't want to duplicate that, but you don't want to have attitudes that really don't reflect the time. Tend to, to have them come across at the moment, the one that I'm working on now is set in Romania. And so there's what they would have called a gypsy community there. And it's tough to decide, because anything you read about Romania at the time is really, really dreadful about these poor Romani people, and how, how dirty they are, and how, and you think there's no reason to go there. But yeah, it is tough, because you have to have something that feels real, but is also reflects, not necessarily modern sensibilities, but the kinds of people that you want to write about, even then.
So, I started that question by saying that, by making the claim that the Golden Age novels sort of revealed some of the biases of the authors. And so I was just wondering for everybody else, how do you, obviously you're going to write about characters who have their own biases. So how do you reveal a character's cultural bias without being accused of those same biases yourself?
I was listening to Lori's answer, and then all I had running through my own head was, I hate stereotypes. They bore me, actually. And so I try to write characters who are stereotypical, and not that they buck the culture so much. It's just that it doesn't come natural to them. I mean, it's more like they don't think like the stereotypical person in our society today would think. They don't respond to an outreach like we would automatically put someone in. And maybe that's because I'm an African-American female, and I resent, to a large extent, being put in a box. And so I want my characters to be out of the box, and I want them to respond to whatever clues they're getting from their surroundings or their story differently. I'd say, yeah, I could do that if I really, I could do that. I want the reader to say, and make them think a little bit, to say, okay, well, that can work for other people, and see that that they cheat themselves by putting people in boxes. You know, that woman who puts her dinner, I think I loved your example, Lori, who puts her dinner set in her on the top of the camel or whatever and goes to the desert. That's not, you don't think that way. You put her in a box, now she's out of the box. And she becomes more interesting and more captivating and more entertaining because she's out of the box than if you had kept her in the box.
And there's also about what does it mean to the story, right? You know, I think that it's kind of gratuitous to say, oh, my character talks like this because he's in the 1920s or 30s, but you got to ask yourself these questions. Okay, what does this mean to my story? How does this fit in with my character? Why is in this situation are these attitudes being exhibited? And then how does it impact the emotion going forward? So those are all kinds of questions you have to ask yourself as an author when you're wanting to maybe, reflect the racism of the time. And I'll tell you, when I first got into mysteries, you know how you go back and you read all the Golden Age and all the, this is American mystery. I had a hard time, especially who wrote The Big Sleep? I know that's probably, you guys are gonna shoot arrows at me because I don't know. Who wrote that? Was that Raymond Chandler? Or is that
Owen can tell you all you ever needed to know.
Okay. All right. I mean, I remember you referred to a Black person as an it. And I almost put that book down because I was like, it's not even like, how does that even, okay, so you got that going on, right? So I just didn't understand why. And ever since I started reading, from a very young age and reading novels and literary novels, and one thing is that when you're reading something and you're all into the story, you're into that fictional dream, and then when you run across something like that, like an it jars you. You're right out of the story. And my experience has been the first thing in my head, and it makes me very, very sad, is to say, oh yeah, that's right. This book wasn't written for me. So it's like, that's how I feel. But I think that the author, and then I'm gonna use that word obligation, it as part of the storytelling, as telling a really true and vivid story is, the reasons why that's in their story at that point in time. And it really has to be, they have to really ask themselves those questions, I feel, and probably even a little bit more. They have to break it open, right?
Annotating The Big Sleep was very tough, partly for that reason, because we had to point these things out, and there was no way around pointing them out. And yet we had one of the great American novels, I think. All we could do was point it out and not make excuses for him, because although he was a person of his time, there is obviously racism in that, and not as much in the first book as in the second book, actually. Yeah. And that's always a moral thing. What do you do with it? Do you throw out the whole thing? Or do you try to appreciate what's good about it? I don't have an answer. We just tried to write about it in our annotations.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I always tell my kids though, there's some times where you just, you can't be the person of your time. You have to stand up and say, yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to, forget that the humanity of someone else. And I know that's tough. And I don't know if I was ever in the situation, if I could do it, but at least, some things you just can't agree with no matter what time you're from. I know that's a little bit judgmental, but I try to tell my kids, think about that, right? When you're, just because, that's the zeitgeist or whatever, kind of think about it a little bit. It's tough.
When I first signed my agent, the reason why I got R. Franklin James was because she told me that men would never read mysteries by women. She said, so like J.D. Robb and P.D. James, that's why they had the initials, to make them more universally appealing. That marketing thing again. But, and so I went along with it. And I remember being in doing a book signing, and a guy comes up to me. He says, I really enjoyed your book. I didn't know it had been written by a woman. And I said to myself, I said, what does that mean? What? And it's that stereotype box thing of and feeling very much not offended.
I think that in that case, I would take it as a compliment that he was saying you got inside their head in a way that he wouldn't have expected. I mean, I used to get comments like that about one of the books that I wrote that was set in a man's point of view and had a lot to do with Vietnam. And I got one of those names that can, especially in Britain, can be a man.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So I had that reaction when that book was out, and I took it as being not. They weren't saying I wouldn't have read this book if I'd known you were a girl. I took it as that it, they were saying you did the voice well, which is.
I think no, he was saying that he would never have bought the book had he known I was a woman.
Probably.
Yeah, because I was not in a male's voice. It was first person female. So I'm thinking it was like a backhanded compliment. And you're right, Laura. Yeah. I took it as, gee, he really liked my book. It appeals to cross gender. And then I thought, but wait a second, I had to hide who I am in order, for you to read, something.
But you got to shell out the money for the book.
That's true. And who knows, maybe now hopefully he's turned the corner and he will now buy books written by women. I don't know.
All women, all the time.
He doesn't deserve us.
I have a friend who reads a lot. And he tracks his reading progress on the Goodreads website. And Goodreads gives you statistics at the end of the year of the books you've read and what's the longest book and everything. And he said that one year he got his statistics at the end of the year and he realized that he had read a remarkably few number of books written by women. And he was sort of appalled at himself for that. And so he made a vow that the following year, he was going to read only books by women. And, it was interesting because I followed his reviews and they're really good and insightful. And, I think he's definitely, revealed to himself that he was missing out on a lot by not being more widely read. So anyway, that's a digression. So we were talking, let's talk a little bit about dialogue. And so, new words and phrases are coming into contemporary usage all the time. So how much thought do you give to reflecting contemporary dialogue in your writing? And I guess for you, Lori, how much thought do you give to reflecting historical dialogue in your writing? And do you worry about the dialogue that you write today becoming dated?
Me, no. Written in 1925 is not going to become too dated. And the only people who use slang are, people who are there just for the slang, really. So I'm okay.
Faye?
My books, the ones that are out now are set in Louisiana. So it just depends on the character. Like Raven Burns' sidekick, Billy Ray, he'll say ain't a lot. And sometimes he won't, depending on the situation he's in. But I just try to make sure don't have too much dialect to where it distracts the reader or offends the reader, or it just seems like I'm being, again, gratuitous with it. So I really work hard at that.
All my characters speak in Berkeley dialect.
It
hasn't changed much since 1968.
That's true.
I think it'll be okay for a while.
A few more awesomes and a few less far outs.
Right.
So speaking of sort of charged dialogue, so how do you decide whether or when your characters might use racial, religious, or gender-based slurs? And are there lines in dialogue that you won't cross?
I'll make mine short. Yes, there are lines that I will not cross in dialogue. And I don't use racial slurs.
Again,
Yeah, I think I'm saved by writing about Berkeley.
hey,
Hopefully in Berkeley, you could never get away with it, and I don't
yeah.
want it.
I mean, if I go back to story, you know, what story are you telling? If there's a slur or something like that, does it have anything to do with the story? Does it have anything to do with the character? If it's moving forward, does it move the story forward? Any of that stuff, that's all the kind of things that I look at. The book that I'm going to be working on for National November Writing Month is about the Harlem Hellfighters. So, I can see it, but before I do it, I'm going to make damn sure that it's essential to my story. And that's what it all boils down to me. Is it essential to your story? Because I'll say it again. And I've read books like this where it says you're jarred right out of that fictional dream. And I think Lori said it, and I know I'm opinionated, but a reader can smell it from a mile away. I think there was one movie that everybody loved. I think it even won an Oscar, and I couldn't stand. It was, The Black Klansman. And there was a scene in the basement, and he was just saying the N-word over and over, and every other sentence. And I'm not if it had to do with the story, and if I was really into that, and I was like, yeah, that needed to be there, it wouldn't have been a bother to me, but I had to walk out because it was just, it was there. It's like an extra limb. It was like an extra limb attached to that movie that did not need to be there. And it, like I said, it just wasn't worth watching the rest of that. And I think readers can smell that. So I try to be really careful.
To some extent too. I mean, a slur is a kind of a lazy insult, isn't it? I mean, it's just kind of, it says as much about the person who's using it as it does the person that they're talking about. And I think when I have my characters, especially in dialogue, when they're delivering an insult, they do it, and they don't. It's not just the sort of casual assumption of characteristics that is a shortcut to an insult.
Mm-hmm. I think at Low Down Dirty Vote, my villain uses it. In Low Down Dirty Vote, I think there's a slur in there that's used by the villain. But I think it goes right back down to the story that's being told.
I do too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are different ways to reveal things about your characters. Language is one of them, but it's certainly not the only one. And so, yeah. Okay, so next question, I'm going to start with Ray. So if we're even paying cursory attention to the world around us today, we know that society is polarized with the extremes of most issues, whether they're political, social, economic, etc., getting the most media attention. But most individuals probably fall somewhere in the middle on most of the issues. So if you assume that crime fiction, whether the stories themselves are contemporary or historical, the crime fiction is read through the lens of current times and events, how conscious are you of incorporating contemporary mores into your writing? Or do you worry about that at all?
I don't know if I worry about it, but I think mores they're mores because they're timeless. You know, they span humanity. So I think I write about them by default. Almost, you cannot not write about them. You're going to, I think, whether you're writing mysteries or romance or whatever, you're still going to, I think, reflect, if it's good writing, I mean, and if it relates to people, you're going to reflect the mores. I think the values of society are going to come out through your characters, be they good, be they bad. If they're good characters, it'll come out through your writing and the story itself. And I think, like every good writer, you sit down and say, like, what I wonder if, and then you're off and running with this idea that you have in your head, and you're telling the story at night to a child and saying, the talking rabbit on the streets of New York, and you're off, what would that be like? And I think with mystery, you automatically reflect the values. I think it just comes out of the pen. You just put keyboard, because time has changed. I think it's timeless. I don't think you have to be concerned about it, really.
I think it has to do with the sense of place too. You want to either bounce off or reflect the mores of the community you're writing about, or the group of people, or the country that you're writing in. So I agree. It just kind of hopefully comes naturally because you're writing from that place.
This is just a question that just hit me when you said that, Owen. Do you think evil is the same? Does it transcend decades? I mean, does it transcend centuries? Evil is evil. Evil back in year one is evil in 2020. Evil is evil. I mean, it's the same thing. It may exhibit differently, but everybody would say, yeah, that's evil.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's a different MO or different ways that it's done. But yeah, that big dark thing we call evil is always there. And that's kind of what we're writing around and about. Definitely.
Lori, what do you?
I think that, I mean, as they both were saying, and core values, both the good and the bad, are there. The way that they're shown comes out and reflects differently in different societies. It's really, sometimes when you are writing about, especially if you're writing about a foreign place in a foreign time, you have to find a different way of illustrating goodness, because the kinds of behaviors that I would consider good in Santa Cruz, California, don't necessarily apply all over on the surface. Deep down underneath, yes, the human values are human values. But that, I think, is one of the interesting things about crime fiction that is set in all kinds of societies and in all kinds of times, that it enables us to hold a mirror up to what we see. That it isn't just looking at odd people in various parts of the world at different times doing things that seem really odd to us. It enables us to see ourselves in 1940 LA or 1925 Riviera or 1980s Papua New Guinea. I mean, the fact that we have something to do with these characters is what enables us to step into the story and wear that skin for a while.
Faye, did you have anything to add?
No, and I love what Ray said. That's what I truly believe, and that's why I think it's not easy, but that you can write about attitudes in historical times without going over any kind of line, because evil and from day one is evil now, right? Denying someone their basic human rights and civil, to me, has been evil. No matter if, I don't care if a good million people are doing it, it's still evil, right? So you just and I believe that. So that's how you can. I just love that, and that's what my thing is. I'm trying to, with my characters, trying to figure out, and Raven is trying to figure out, what is the definition of what is real evil, as well. So yeah.
Okay, well, we're coming up on the end of our time, I think. So I've got just one more question that kind of ties into what that's sort of the classic wrap-up question of what are you working on next. But I'm just gonna tie it into, what's going on today. So obviously in kind of a strange time, an interesting time, challenging time. So the COVID-19 pandemic is going on. We've got a lot of social issues that are, coming to the, bubbling to the surface with issues around police brutality, increased calls for racial equality and social justice. So how do you think that you will address the realities of 2020 in your work? Or will you just ignore them? And Lori, you can just wait till my follow-up question in a minute. You think you're gonna, how do you think this year is gonna affect your future writing? Ray.
Oh, me. Well, I probably, to a large extent, will probably just avoid it and dodge it, frankly, because I'm in it, and I think it's going to take some perspective because I can't figure out how we got here. So I will just avoid it and see how history treats it. And just to tell you the truth, I'll just write around it.
What are you going to do, Faye?
And I'm going back to, and I know I like strong opinions when you first start talking about obligation and all that stuff, but I'm going to go back to something Ray said earlier, is I don't think that you may try to write around, but you can't, it's going to come out, it's going to bubble up to the surface. I did on this book with A Killing Fire, not so much on my last book. With the sequel, it does have a few more racial undertones, especially with Billy Ray, who's Raven's best friend. Because something really bad happened to him in the first book, and he's trying to come to terms with who he is and what it means to be a Black man living in the contemporary South. So I think I may have written him like that because of what was happening in it, and I probably wasn't even aware of it. So I think it's going to bubble up. It's going to be there.
I guess what I should have added to my list of 2020 things, hurricanes.
Yeah.
Faye, you're writing about Louisiana, and
yeah,
you're watching the news before this came on, and
yeah, it's just terrible.
Yeah. So what about you, Owen? What do you think you're gonna do with 2020 in fiction?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's a terrible time, but it's grist for the mill. I mean, it's something to write about, and my sidekick character has already been out breaking windows and looting and burning. So. It's kind of perfect for me. Somebody might disagree with him there, but no, it's horrible. But for a writer, God, yeah, I wouldn't. It's like it's served to us on a platter. We have to talk about it.
Well, it's also a problem because if you are writing now, and we're still in the middle of masks and waiting for a vaccine and all the rest of it, the book wouldn't be out for a year, 18 months. And by that time, it's a different world. So I actually do have a contemporary novel that I would normally have started next year. And I'm not sure whether I will or not, because you can't, I mean, if you're writing in a room with an elephant in the corner, you can't ignore the elephant. So you can either go elsewhere or write about the elephant. And I'm sort of thinking that I may just not, I'll wait until it's over before I address a contemporary one.
Kind of like 2011, right? Or when the towers fell. A lot of writers waited a little bit before.
Yeah. How do you write a New York book in the wake of 2001? It's just how could you do that?
Okay, so for the last quick lightning round question, it's the good old standard. What are you working on now, and what can readers expect to see next? Lori.
Romania. Russell and Holmes are going off to Transylvania and meeting some very interesting people and maybe vampires.
Cool. Ray.
New series, book 1 comes out in February, genealogist turned detective.
That sounds very good. That sounds very timely. Faye.
I have the sequel to A Killing Fire coming out, but that's with the editor, so that's on him right now. And then I am going to be during National November Writing Month, writing what I heard Jess Lowry calls the book of the heart. My book of my heart is going to be about the Harlem Hellfighters. So yay! We'll see. 50,000 words.
And is that a cat behind you?
No, that's a cat dog. It's
a
cat
dog. Okay. Yeah, now I
He's
can tell
like
it's a dog. All I can see were the ears.
Yeah, I know. We call him cat dog. Call him cat dog.
I should say, Faye, and anyone who's listening, that MWA NorCal, we're doing a couple of write-ins every week so if you want to have people there on the screen keeping an eye to make sure you are focused in writing for an hour.
Okay.
In our writing.
So Owen, what are you working on?
I'm zeroing in on my next Clay Blackburn novel. It's not to the point where it's even gone to an agent yet or anything, but I'll finish it, I think. And there's a sort of fictionalized memoir coming out on a tiny press called Bootstrap Press. They do great work. So I guess it's not crime fiction, but I've been working on that too.
Great. Okay. Lori Sheehan, are you there? Do we have any?
I am indeed. So there is one question that was posted from Sterling Cannell that says, what does the genre of domestic noir written in the last 10 to 15 years reveal about contemporary fears?
Wow.
I know.
People.
Who wants to take a first crack at that?
Any of us, right? Domestic.
Noir?
Domestic, what? So Owen did mention MacGuffins and Attica Locke. So Owen, do you have, do any of those play into more modern current fears that we have now? And do they find their way into modern noir writing?
Oh, I think so. I mean, Attica Locke, I mean, it's so contemporary, and it is deals with, of course, with racism and other issues. So there, I mean, the fear around that. But there are those. I think maybe they're talking about those noirs where, and the names escape me, but
Would Megan Abbott be one?
Megan Abbott, that sort of thing. Which I don't know. It seems like it's definitely in the tradition of noir, with all the fears that the
Fear.
books of the 40s have.
Yeah, the fear of change, fear of things not being what they seem to be, the fear of being marginalized, the fear of being taken over, that kind of thing, maybe.
And Laurie King, I think when Mary Russell and Sherlock Holmes encounter the other, which they certainly do in their travels, that plays into modern fears of people who are not like us, however you want to define not like me.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to take the books on the road a lot, and it's always one of the things that I'm looking for in writing about plunking my people down in various odd parts of the world is they are definitely outsiders. Of course, crime fiction is all about outsiders. So they come into it and they have to try and figure out, first they have to try and figure out the patterns of society, and then they have to try and figure out how whatever it is they're looking at doesn't fit them. So it's it's they're always uncomfortable, usually cold, and and they never can get a decent cup of tea.
As Katrina McPherson would say, tea always tastes like paper in America.
Mm.
That's
So another comment was posted by Stephen Black. And this is not a question as much as a comment. And it was while you were talking about themes of social justice and how they sneak into your books unbidden. He wrote, in the 1970s, the British writer John Fowles, who wrote The French Lieutenant Woman and The Collector, wrote, and this is in quotes, if you want to be true to reality, start lying about it. Do you guys feel that's true?
Mhm.
Yeah, I do. It almost brings us back full circle to how we
Sure.
started. Yeah,
Yeah. So tell the truth, but tell it slant.
right.
We might need to develop an anthology of writers online. Something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think that, I mean, the whole idea of what we do is we lie for a living. And I always find it so fascinating to meet people who have this sneaking suspicion that you haven't really made it up, really. I mean, you guys may not come across this as often as I do, but you know, I get letters from people who say, how can Sherlock Holmes still be alive? He says, alive now as he ever was.
Oh, that's a good.
People's willingness to suspend their disbelief and just die.
Yeah.
I think Doyle would be very happy about that.
And I think that's sweet. in a scary kind of way.
Yeah.
Oh, how sweet. In a scary kind of way.
Look around for your escort and say, don't go too far away.
Yeah, exactly.
So Randy, I'll leave this up to you. That was the last question. If anyone
Okay.
else has any, do you want to invite them on now? I'll go
Yeah,
ahead and stop
yeah,
the
let's
recording and
invite
stop
people.
Facebook Live.
Yeah. Go ahead
All
and
right.
ask people to turn on their cameras and join the party.
That was a good panel. And Randy, thank you.
Yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you all.
Randy. You did a good
Fantastic.
job.